And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television show that profiles local authors, editors, and publishers in our community. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. On our program this week, we are going to talk to poet and writer Neil Carpathios. And Neil Carpathios is an award-winning poet. He's also the author of 3 full-length poetry collections, as well as several chapbooks. He teaches at Shawnee State University in Portsmouth, Ohio, where he also serves as the coordinator of creative writing. We're delighted to have him here today to talk to us about his work and about his upcoming work, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, Every River on Earth. So Neil, welcome to Chapter. So nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in writing, how did you become a writer, and where did all of that interest and motivation come from?
Yeah, that's a question you get asked a lot, I think, but it's not that easy to answer, because it was a long time ago. When did it actually start? I think that probably for me, I have to give a lot of credit to my father, who loved literature. He was a physician, but he had a huge library, and he loved talking to me about Greek mythology. He was from Greece, and so I grew up with all these stories of gods and goddesses, and Homer, and the Iliad, the Odyssey, and Greek poetry, and I think that's probably where it started. And I excelled and liked it in high school, and then when I went to Ohio State, I majored in English and got a little bit more serious. And from there, I knew I wanted to really pursue it, so I went to graduate school at the University of Iowa, Writer's Workshop, for creative writing, and that's really where I think I, became kind of obsessed with it, and then that's where I am.
Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like, being at Iowa, being in a creative writing program. We've had some authors on that have talked about that, some authors that are currently pursuing that. What was that process like, and what was sort of the curriculum and training that you went through in that program to help improve your writing?
Yeah, it was a wonderful, one-of-a-kind experience because I was able to get validation. I had for the first time people around me, students as well as mentors, that felt the same seriousness and passion that I did about writing, because you know that writing's a very isolating activity, and sometimes you're looked at a little strangely by family members or friends who don't completely understand what it's all about or why you're doing it. So to be in an environment like that where other people value what you're doing, I think that was the biggest thing, the biggest value, biggest benefit for me. But then the program at the MFA is sort of a mentor-based model, a workshop model where you'll work with an accomplished author in your genre. In my case, it was poetry. And also you'll be in groups critiquing each other's work in a classroom setting. And a place like Iowa, a very good, large program. We were lucky we had the benefit of weekly authors passing through, giving readings, little seminars. So I was just bombarded by the things that I loved, to the point where after 2 years I was ready for a break, and now again I miss it because I'm far away from that environment. But learned a lot. You learn about certain tricks in writing and how to improve and better your own. So it was wonderful.
That's great. That's great. Tell us a little bit about your first full-length poetry collection. I do want to talk about Beyond the Bones and also the Axis of the Imponderables.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
yes, it is. I wanted to make sure I got that right too. I took my time on that one. But what was that like, writing that first collection of poetry? Was it something you would set out to write a collection, or were they just individual poems that over time you collected and put together? How did the collection really come together?
That's a great question. Well, like all of my books, I don't have a conscious vision of how it's going to end up. I write individual poems as I go along and rework them, try to make them as good as they can be. Then it's a certain point, after I've published many of them in journals, I'll have a body of poetry, and I'll say, it's time, let's see how these can work together. And I'll literally just spread them out, look at possible motifs or threads of themes that run throughout them. And then I'll go about the work of seeing if they fall into sections or a certain order that maybe tells a little bit of a story. So that comes later in the process. Really, it's just one poem at a time. The first book, Playground of Flesh, which was my first full-length book, I was teaching high school English. And, as you might know, it's a demanding thing. And
Absolutely.
so those poems, this was after Iowa, my experience in graduate school. So the poems came rather slowly, given the time demands upon me. And so that first book took a little while. And then it was published. It was a runner-up in a national competition. And the runner-up was published too, so I was lucky to have that. And then after that first one, I made really the move to teaching college. I wanted to really focus more on creative writing. And so not only did I switch gears, so to speak, with teaching, but the poetry started to come much more quickly, because college teaching is wonderful for a writer, because there's pockets of time, to write. So that's how the first one came about.
Where are some places that you seek for publication? I know that you've had several collections published, but if you have individual poems that you're looking to get published, where are some outlets that you like to go to get publication, that maybe some of our audience who are poets or like to get some poems published, places they could look?
Right. Well, I'll tell you now, in this day and age, there's so many places. I mean, all you need to do is get online and Google poetry magazines, and you'll have listings of hundreds of them. When I started out, really, there wasn't so much of that. And there are the established ones, like there's Poetry Magazine. I've had poems in there. American Poetry Review. There's, of course, the Paris Review, the Georgia Review. There's certain more established journals that are in print, and now they are online, too. So really, I think anybody can find easily outlets. I think it's generally a better idea to start with smaller venues. It's a little less competitive, a little less discouraging.
Yeah.
And build your way up. I mean, I still get discouraged an awful lot. But just start out with smaller journals. I tell my students to start out with the university-based journal, community-based journals, publications. I do write a poetry column in the newspaper, Portsmouth Daily Times. It's called Let's Talk Poetry. It's in there every Sunday. And the main reason I started that is to showcase some of our local talent. So those kind of outlets, I think, which might be a little easier to get into, but they're still very good. Get your feet wet, and then try for some of the bigger fish.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Let's talk a little bit about your collection, Beyond the Bones, which is a collection that I really enjoyed. I haven't read all of them yet, but I'm getting there.
Oh, really?
But I wanted to ask you a little bit about something that popped up in that collection of poetry. Is there's a lot of explanations and poems directed towards the body.
Right.
And there's this the passion that the body goes through, the hurts that the body goes through, the hungers that the body has.
Right.
How did all that come about? Is that a sort of a theme that you write about a lot? And if so, how did you choose those poems and craft those poems for that collection?
Yeah, great question. Even reviewers and friends have noticed this. So your observation's very good. And that forced me to think about it a little bit, because I think when you're creating and writing these things, you're not analyzing as you go along. But after a while, you start to see, even in your own work, geez, I write a lot about the body. Or, I'm using the metaphor of the body, the vessel that is the body, and it keeps cropping up. And to be honest, again, I think it relates back to my father, who was a surgeon. And I grew up in a home where I was very aware, not necessarily in an overly morbid way, but I was made aware of his daily work with bodies and life and death. And he was a very, very sensitive and deep man, and he let me into his life. And he did, as I got older, we had discussions about mortality and the body and the vessel that we all inhabit, and the spirit, which is, I think, something that's a mystery to all of us. But we mainly live in a sensory way, whether it's pleasure, pain, fear, joy, through this vehicle of the body. And so to me, it might not be the most original metaphor, but it's one that I think was embedded early on, and it seems like I continue to return to it quite a bit. Son of a surgeon. There you go. That's your answer.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I think what's interesting too, and I know my limited ability with science and the body being that it is that, you know, you were talking about our spirit and our soul, that so much of what we think and what we feel oftentimes does affect our health. You know, if we you know, if we feel a certain way about someone, positively or negatively, that often affects our health, our stress level, our blood pressure, those
No
kinds
doubt
of things.
about that.
And it seems like there's that connection that goes through this Beyond the Bones collection too, is that sometimes the physical, in terms of some of the body imagery and themes, does affect the emotional too. And so it seems like there's a direct tie in there back with what you were saying about being a physician, and that the spirit does impact the physical body as well.
No doubt. I mean, yeah, you captured it perfectly. I can't add much to it. I mean, you know, they intertwine. The body, experience of the body, the experience of the mind. You know, you have magazines, Mind, Body, all that, you know, New Age. I meant much of it very good that I like. But so, like I said, it might not be the most original concept, but it's one that I think that everybody shares because we're here in bodies.
Yeah.
And so that is a theme.
And fortunately or unfortunately, we only get one. We only get one body.
And it breaks down.
Yes.
It's starting to break down.
Absolutely, yes, indeed. I wanted to ask you, too, about your other collection of poetry, The Axis of the Imponderables. And this was the winner of the Quercus Review Poetry Series.
Right.
First, before we talk about that, about the collection, what is the Quercus Review Poetry Series?
It's a press, very reputable press out in Modesto, California. And they have a competition for the best book that they receive. And that year I was lucky enough to have my book chosen. And The Glamorous Life of a Poet. I think I got $1,000, which was nice. But hey, I'll take that anytime. And they flew me out there. I gave a reading, and it was very nice. And of course, I got the book published. And so those are little victories. And we'll take them as they come along, because they're interspersed with a lot of rejection. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that book was my second book. And to be honest with you, it's made up of poems that didn't make it into my first book. And so after the first book, Playground of Flesh, came out, I spent the summer, I had all these leftover poems that I thought were really pretty good, but they somehow didn't fit into the thematic construction of the first book. So I spent the summer putting those together. So in a way, I call it my leftover or scrap. The book made out of scraps. And sometimes it ends up being even better that way. You know, it seemed more natural. It just kind of fell into place.
And a couple things that are interesting, too, is, again, sort of like with Beyond the Bones, we've got this idea of bodies and physical components that are there also. But there's also, you know, this idea of the relationship that exists between the body and sort of the spirit, and how it lasts longer maybe than the body does. And in doing some research, I noticed that Thomas Sayers Ellis wrote this about your collection. He said, "It's been a while since a young poet has badgered himself with his many imaginative questions as Neil Carpathios has. These poems are fueled line by line by all of life's negotiations and the ironic relationships between our jealous bodies and our often resentful, longer-lasting things," which I thought was a great quote that really encapsulates.
Well, you know, there's two things about that. One, my favorite part of that blurb, there's a blurb on the back of the book. He referred to me as a young poet. I really like that. That was better than anything. But also, it shows you that these blurbs are so beautifully, eloquently written that they render your own work almost superfluous.
Sure.
Because he very eloquently commented. But anyway, he was very generous to do that.
Have you met Thomas Sayers Ellis or familiar with a lot of his work?
Well, he lived in Cleveland for a while. And I met him once at a literary event, briefly, but he's a great poet.
I know one of the things you've been working on, and this book will be out in the early part of 2015, is sort of a multi-genre collection called Every River on Earth, Writing from Appalachia, Ohio. And we're going to display a cover of that on the screen for our audience here in just a little bit. But this is a collection of poetry, creative nonfiction, and essays. Tell us a little bit about this collection. You were the editor primarily on this book. Why did you decide to put this together? Where did you get the poetry, the nonfiction, and the essays from?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited. It's scheduled to be released next month, January. But what happened was about 6.5 years ago, I came to Shawnee State University in Portsmouth, Ohio. I was brought there to teach creative writing. And when I came, I immediately started to notice that things were a little bit different from what I was used to. Appalachia. Being from northeastern Ohio, the Rust Belt, it's more different than I had suspected. And when I got here, I really noticed things like the natural beauty of the land, which far outweighs the beauty, I think, up north. The people speak a little bit different. There's certain cultural flourishes here and there, that are different from what I'm used to. It seemed like a place that is primal in its beauty and marked by paradox. The beauty alongside the poverty, the drug problem that's been well documented recently in the news, with beautiful, tight-knit, friendly, family-structured people. So a lot of opposites that haunted and really intrigued me. And so, like most things, when I want to learn about them, I turn mainly to creative writing. History books, textbooks can only offer, I think, so much surface information. And really, I get most of my information that I crave in a textural way, subtle shades from creative writing, poems, stories, creative essays. And so I had this idea to put out a call for submissions throughout the country for writers who have had at some point some connection to Appalachian Ohio. And so we ended up with 40 contributors. Many are from this area. Many have moved away. Established writers, some newer writers. And I think it's a beautiful book, and it kind of paints a psychic picture of the place. And I learned a lot being the editor, which was almost like a selfish motive, But I also thought that this area is a little bit underrepresented in general in terms of the literary arts compared to places like Cleveland, even Akron. There's Kent State University. Of course, we have Marshall's excellent and Ohio University, but still, overall, it's a little bit more rural and secluded. And I know that there are a lot of writers who aren't given voice. So I thought also this book would help to just show everybody that, we have something going on here too.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
And I know Ohio University Press is handling the publication of this book. How did you get matched up with them, and what has that process been like working with them leading up to the publication of the book?
Well, when I started out, I've never edited a book. And I approached various publishers. I did a little research, and I queried them. I sent out book proposals outlining my idea. And of course, there's more than that involved. Just how does my book stand out from others in its category to entice presses. And I was thrilled. I couldn't have, if I were able to choose on my own one, I would be so lucky to have Ohio University Press. They're the largest academic press in Ohio, very well respected, and they worked with me throughout the process, just in a very helpful way. But here's another learning experience, and the famous novelist E.L. Doctorow, he has a quote. He says that writing a novel is like driving alone in a car at night. He says you can only see as far as the headlights. but you can make the whole trip that way. And it's definitely true with editing an anthology. There were times where I was very discouraged, where I wasn't quite sure what I was doing, and I had to work through certain steps. But I think in the end, the finished product is going to be something we're proud of.
Would you do it again? Would you be another editor on another collection?
I would, but not for a while. Take a little break.
I understand. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So from the time that you put out the first call or started putting out the calls for submissions to the time that maybe you found the press to publish this, and maybe that was backwards. You'd mentioned that you'd queried some publishers first, but from the time you started doing that process until the time the manuscript was finished, what was that timeline like, and how much time had passed between all of those moving parts leading up to the final publication?
Right. Like I said, it was a long journey at night. It took about 2 years, I'd say, and it started with almost simultaneously contacting the presses and advertising to writers to send submissions, just to get it underway. And so gathering the submissions took a little bit of time, then selecting what would be in the book, corresponding with everyone who submitted work, whether they had acceptances or rejections, going through the editing process. I was lucky. I had 2 editorial assistants who actually were past students of mine that helped quite a bit. Matt McGuire and Kelly Grooms. I have to mention their names. But so the editing process, the manuscript then was sent out to outside readers, leaders in the field of Appalachian literature to see the collection, offer their own insights. The press sends that out. And so then they had their own suggestions that I had to consider, and most of them were very good, but I made adjustments to the book. Proofreading in the later stages, which just in the past month, 2 months. And so, yeah, there's more to it than I ever imagined.
Yeah.
I've been in anthologies as a contributor, and boy, is that easy. They just say, yeah, well, we'll use your poem. Done. Whereas this, oh my, and my wife also, she's very knowledgeable with computer work. So she helped me to format the book, which I really would have struggled with. So that left me to focus more on the literary end. So I had some help, from the press, of course, editorial assistants, my wife. So it was an experience.
Really a team effort to get it.
It was a team effort. It was.
That's great. In our final moments with you, Neil, I wanted to ask you, what are you working on next? You'd mentioned that this was pretty time intensive to put together Every River on Earth, but what are you working on next? What's in the pipeline next for you in terms of your writing? Well,
I just completed my next book of poems. I've been working on it since 2009. That's when my last book came out. Beyond the Bones. And so that book is pretty much finished, tinkering slightly, but I've already sent it out to a few places. And now it's the waiting game, Going to get the rejections, and hopefully, just like fishing, maybe you'll get a nibble here and there.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing right now.
And hopefully there's a largemouth bass, so to speak, on the end of that nibble when you do get the nibble.
That's right.
That's great. And Neil, if any of our audience wants to get in contact with you, if they want to find out more about your collections of poetry or more about the upcoming book, Every River on Earth, or just get in contact with you to talk about writing in general, how can they reach you? Where can they get copies of your work?
Well, they can contact me, and and even when I have my column in the newspaper, and my email address at the university, which is ncarpathios@shawnee.edu. But my work is available just online anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Most of the book distributors have those. Ohio University Press, of course, will have this, but this is also currently available all over the internet for pre-order. So in this day and age, it's pretty easy, to get a hold of those things.
That's great. That's great. Well, Neil Carpathios, author and editor, we appreciate you coming in to talk to us about your work today. Congratulations on your 3 collections of poetry already published, and we wish you the best of luck with your next collection of poetry, and more importantly, Every River on Earth. We're certainly looking forward to reading that. We think a lot of our audience interested in learning a little bit more about what makes this area so special will enjoy it as well. Thanks so much for being our guest today. Appreciate it so much. Enjoyed it. Thank you. And lastly, we want to thank the staff and management of Empire Books and News who work so hard behind the scenes to make each episode of Chapters possible. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News for all of your reading needs. Many of the authors whom you've seen featured here on Chapters, as well as the publishers and editors you've seen featured on Chapters, have their works for sale here at Empire Books and News. So we encourage you to come down and check those out if you'd like to pick up a copy, or whatever reading desire you may have, Charlotte and her staff can get you taken care of right here at Empire Books and News, Pullman Square in downtown Huntington. We thank them so much for providing our studio taping space each week here for Chapters. And if you've got a question, comment, or story suggestion about this Chapters program or any Chapters program that you've seen on Armstrong Cable, we certainly would like to hear from you. You can send us an email address to the address that pops up right here on the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. Please keep that feedback coming. We do appreciate all the comments that we have received about Chapters, so please keep them coming. And we also want to remind you that if you've missed a previous episode of Chapters, or you want to go back and watch an episode of Chapters again, maybe for the second, third, or fourth time, we've made it possible for you to do that on our YouTube page through the Armstrong One Wire link. All you have to do is go to www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire. That's all one word, and you can see that address also here at the bottom of your screen. From there, you can click on the Chapters tab and find over 11 hours of author, editor, and publisher interviews from our 2+ seasons of work here on Chapters. So we encourage you to go check those out. You can watch them, you can copy them, save them, download them to your iPod, your computer, your MP3 player, share them with friends and family, whatever you'd like to do. So if you've missed one or want to go back and take another look at one of those episodes of Chapters, you can do that through the Armstrong One Wire YouTube page. So we encourage you to check that out. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters. Please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.